My mother wants me to give my vacation house to my sister as a wedding gift, but after kicking me out at 16, my only gift will be legal problems for them. I never thought I would be the one to call my family toxic, but some scars from the past never heal completely. I was 16 when my mother threw me out of the house. It wasn't for drugs or stealing, it was for having a boyfriend. I still remember the night she found out. She was furious, yelling about how I was disrespecting the family. Reasoning with her was impossible because she saw it as the worst betrayal. She packed a suitcase, handed it to me, and told me I had to start my life on my own, clearly thinking I was an adult. I didn't have many options. I ended up on a friend's sofa for a while going to school and working in a cafe until I could afford a place for myself. I worked double shifts, saved every penny I could, and eventually managed to escape that situation by the time I was 28. I had a stable job and enough savings to buy something I had always dreamed of, a small vacation house by the lake. That house was more than just property to me. It wasn't a fancy house like you see on TV. It was modest, but it was enough for spending weekends there, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee to find peace. I have to say the way we were raised was very different for my younger sister Liana. When she got pregnant in her second year of college, my mom's reaction couldn't have been more different from how she reacted to me. I only had a boyfriend, but her reaction was, "Poor Liana, she made a mistake. But she was just a child." Mom welcomed her home with open arms and dropped everything to help her. Liana's boyfriend Danny wasn't exactly a catch. If you were looking for a loser, he was it. He didn't work, had no ambitions, and was happy living off Liana and Mom. Yet Mom loved to brag about how they were going to make it work and how her baby would make the family bigger and more loving. I don't know if loving is the word I would use. Even after I cut contact with my mother, I still had some communication with my sister during this time, until the recent events. The call came one Sunday morning while I was enjoying my coffee at the lake house. I think the only thing my house lacks is a signal, so I wouldn't receive calls like that. Liana and Danny were getting married and needed a place to live. The call was to ask me for a special wedding gift, my house at the lake so they could have a home. Mom said they needed a boost, and my house would be perfect for raising the baby, even though she only knew of the baby's existence and not what my house was like. According to my mother, the house was going to be perfect because the baby would grow up in nature. Plus, they wouldn't be able to rent a decent place since Danny was still looking for a job, and my sister didn't plan to work once the baby was born. She wasn't working at that moment either. I made it clear to her that the house wasn't for sale since I wasn't going to just give it away. The most sensible thing would be for my mother to buy it for my sister, but she said she wasn't going to pay for it. It would be a completely free gift from me. If I wanted, I could include it as part of the gift. I told her I had worked hard to buy it, and it meant a lot to me. My mother not only wanted me to give away a house, but if it seemed fine to her, she also wanted to be part of the gift. The good news for me was that at least she'd give me the option to decide that part. I told her I would probably buy a coffee maker or something like that as a wedding gift, but I wasn't going to give away a house. Plus, nobody had given me a house when she kicked me out at 16. Her response was that it was different because I had caused it myself. She said our differences shouldn't carry over to Liana because she was innocent. I had been irresponsible as a teenager, but I never tried to blame Liana. It was always my mother's fault. It didn't matter if I was a teenager. I just had a boyfriend, while she got pregnant as an adult by someone who couldn't even pay rent. By the end of the call, Mom was screaming that I hadn't learned any lessons during all this time. She hung up after telling me she hoped I would reconsider. I told her I wouldn't. The worst part was starting to receive messages from Liana. By then, my mother had filled her head, and she expected me to just give her my house. Danny also intervened, sending a long message about how he had always admired me and wanted to follow my lead, but they needed this to start off. I told them to get their priorities straight. They needed to find a job before having a baby, and I wasn't going to be the one to fix their mess. I wouldn't take responsibility for their problems. My mother also sent a very long message that must have taken her a lot of time to write, because it was well written. She said that if she had a vacation home, she would give it away, but unfortunately, she didn't have the same upbringing as I did and hadn't been as successful. So, my mother was not only justifying kicking me out at 16, but she was also taking credit for everything I've achieved. I didn't respond because she knows very well that none of what I have in my life is thanks to her. It's in spite of her. If she truly believed that, she should turn my lake house into a crazy house for her. I know someone will be losing their coffee maker because my house is off the table, and any other wedding gift too. Update 1. I thought the calls and messages were bad, but they were nothing compared to what happened next. They started to escalate things, and they did, but I don't know if it was a smart move for them. I had just finished a long workday and was looking forward to my weekend at the lake house to relax. This drama with Mom and Liana had drained me when I received a notification on my phone. It was from my home security app, alerting me that there had been movement on the property. I opened the live feed, and there they were, people who weren't supposed to be there. Liana and Danny were on my porch tampering with the door. I could see Danny holding a crowbar, trying to break the lock while Liana was nervously looking around behind him. I had to call the local police. Even though they were my sister and brother-in-law, I explained the situation and asked them to send someone right away. The dispatcher assured me that the officers were on their way, but those few minutes felt like hours while I watched them on the camera. I don't have anything of value there, but I'm one of those people who doesn't like anyone touching their things. I could faintly hear their voices through the feed. Liana was urging Danny to hurry, saying someone might see them. Danny yelled back that it was her fault they had to do this because she couldn't convince me to give them the house. When the officers arrived, Liana and Danny panicked and tried to run, but it was too late. The officers caught them and interrogated them right there on the porch. I could hear Liana crying, telling the officers that it was all a misunderstanding and that she thought she had permission to be there. I gave them access to the security footage that clearly showed Danny trying to break in. Eventually, he was arrested for attempted burglary, and Liana was charged as an accomplice. The next day, Mom called me furious. She said I had totally overreacted by involving the police and that I hadn't thought through the consequences because they couldn't go to jail. They were practically kids. I told her kids shouldn't have children or break into other people's homes, and if they were kids, then all the stuff they did should be punished with the same yardstick Mom used against me. I told her it wasn't right for her to make excuses for her daughter. She should be teaching her a lesson, and in a few years, waiting to see how she buys her own lake house. She told me she was my mother, and as such, ordering me to drop the charges and help my pregnant sister, my nephew, and my brother-in-law get out of there, or else... I asked her else what? But the conversation ended again with my mom hanging up. I was getting used to it. Update 2. Here are the consequences of the attempted break-in. Liana stopped calling and sending messages, which is a positive sign, but Mom intensified her efforts. She started calling me every day, leaving voicemails for me to fix everything. At one point, she even showed up at my apartment unannounced. When I opened the door, she went straight to begging and demanding both things at once. She said that Liana was devastated after being released on bail, while Danny was humiliated, and that I was the only one who could fix things. She pleaded with me to drop the charges against Danny and Liana and let them have the house. I told her that those feelings they had were common, as long as you were a person who committed a crime. I said I wasn't dropping anything and that the house would remain mine until I decided to sell it. But the magical word here was sell, not give it away, especially not to my family. That's when she pulled out her trump card. She said that if I didn't do this for Liana, I would regret it for the rest of my life. She said family was all we had, and someday I would be sitting at my lake house lamenting losing my family. I told her the only thing I would lament on my porch was not having cut Liana off too, because this was giving me headaches. I asked her if she ever regretted kicking me out at 16, because it certainly didn't seem like it. She started stammering. I told Mom that family should be reciprocal, and that I wasn't going to sacrifice myself for people who had never been there for me. She looked at me as if I had slapped her. Without saying another word, she turned around and walked away. It was very similar to when she calls. That same night, I received a short and direct message from Liana saying, "You've ruined my life." I wasn't going to respond because I knew it wasn't worth it, but then I was tempted, so I replied, "You're ruining that child's life. Give him up for adoption." At least my last weekend at the lake house helped me cope with all this drama. I didn't want to give it away to my sister because it was absurd. It was a therapeutic source for me. I could never part with it. Update 3. My mom and Liana seem like two magicians because they always have a card up their sleeve, something I never saw coming. I thought the fiasco of the attempted break-in and Mom's dramatic visit had been the climax of this disaster, but I was wrong. It started a series of social media posts. Liana dedicated herself to playing the perfect villain in this whole situation. She wrote about how I was hoarding a vacation house, while there are people who have nowhere to live, like her, a mother, about to have her baby. Conveniently, she omitted the part about the attempted burglary, her arrest, and how Mom got them out of jail. She also left out that I worked for this house and expected everyone to just give it to her. The post also included a picture of her with teary eyes standing in front of a small apartment. The comments were mixed. Some people, mostly acquaintances, criticized her for demanding a property without working for it. But there were some people, probably communists, who hoped I would give her my house as a way to redistribute wealth. Nothing in those comments seemed to care about creating wealth. They just wanted to redistribute it from those who work to those who don't. No wonder the idea of redistributing wealth is so attractive. No one cares that I live in a small apartment in the city to be able to have a house where I can escape on weekends. Some think I'm some kind of millionaire flying to my lakeside mansion in a helicopter, laughing at the poor from above. At first, I ignored it. The people who knew the truth weren't falling for the story, and those who didn't know weren't my problem. But then, Liana crossed the line. She posted a picture of my lake house with a caption that said something like, "This is the house my selfish sister is keeping all to herself while I struggle to keep a roof over my head." The photo was clearly taken just before they got arrested. The comments exploded. People started speculating about where the house was and how much it was worth. Some even joked about showing up there to occupy it themselves. I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. I contacted a lawyer to see what my options were. He advised me to seek a restraining order against Liana and Danny, citing the attempted burglary and the harassment on social media. He also suggested to send a cease and desist letter to force Liana to take down the posts. The restraining order was granted quickly given the evidence I had, but the damage was already done. Privacy is essential to me, and is part of why I have the house by the lake. When you spend too much time in the city, you feel like privacy is a scarce commodity. But out there, in the middle of nowhere, with neighbors living far away, you get a little bit of that back. After the restraining order was issued, Liana finally stopped posting about me online, but that didn't mean the drama was over. Instead, Mom decided to take matters into her own hands. She showed up at my lake house one Saturday morning, unannounced. I was outside tending to my garden when I heard her car approaching. I hadn't invited her and certainly didn't want to deal with her, but I knew ignoring her would only make things worse. My mom wasted no time getting straight to the point. She said she was there to talk common sense to me because, in her words, I had destroyed my relationship with Liana and ruined the family over past issues that I couldn't forget. I told her that those past issues made it impossible for me to connect with her. Mom dismissed it as if it were nothing, saying Liana was just desperate and didn't know what else to do. She said I should understand, because, after all, I had also been young and reckless. I told her that there was a big difference between being young and making mistakes and being an adult who refuses to take responsibility for their actions. I didn't receive half the help Liana did when I was a teenager, and for something much less serious than what was happening now. The conversation ended again when my mother got angry and turned around to get in her car. Unfortunately, the restraining order didn't include my mother, otherwise she would have been arrested too. Update 4. I decided to tell my story on social media to set the record straight for anyone listening to my mother or sister. I took a deep breath and started writing, laying out everything that had happened as clearly and honestly as possible. I had to look back a lot because the post started from when I was kicked out at 16 for the crime of having a boyfriend, and continued with all the sacrifices I had to make until I managed to buy a house by the lake. Years and years of working weekends to achieve something like that. Then I focused on Liana, talking about how neither she nor her fiancé could sacrifice anything to work, and expected everything to be handed to them on a silver platter. I wasn't going to hide anything that had happened recently, her attempt to break into my vacation home. To clarify, I added that the lake house was mine and only mine, bought with my money. I wrote that I had no legal, moral, or any obligation to give it to anyone, especially people like them. I read the post 3 times before hitting publish. It was direct but not cruel, objective but not devoid of emotion. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I just wanted to set things straight. Many acquaintances and strangers said my family was a group of manipulators. Of course, not everyone supported me. My sister and my mom's flying monkeys were still around. The difference was they didn't do it publicly, but in private messages. I told them that if they didn't shut up, I would publish the messages they had sent me, and with that, they lost their wings. Liana was the first to react, perhaps because she spends all day glued to her phone. I hadn't seen her without her phone in hand since the day she tried to get into my house, and yes, she was furious, which I had predicted. Her issue, among others, was the future. I asked her, "What future?" My mom at least just wanted me to delete the post. I told her that the post only existed because they had been provoking me. If they hadn't done anything they did, no one would know about their dirty laundry. I also left her the warning that if they attacked me again, the next thing would be worse. Later that night, I received a call from a mutual friend who had seen my post. She told me Liana and Danny were in a panic, with Danny threatening to sue me for defamation. It was so funny, because everything I had written was true, and I had the screenshots to prove it. But with what money did he think he'd sue me? They should save that money to solve their breaking and entering problem. They are going to need it. Update 5. The other night, Liana called me very late, crying. And it wasn't crocodile tears, she was genuinely upset. Danny had left her. He packed his bags and blamed her for everything. He told her she was toxic and he couldn't take it anymore. Well, Danny must not have a mirror at home. My sister was scared and felt alone, and she didn't think she could raise a child on her own, and now she was calling her sister for help after everything she had done to me. I would like to say this is unique, but I find entitled people who treat you terribly only to ask for help all the time in my life. I told her she had no one to blame but herself. She decided to bring a baby into the world without any plan, without considering the consequences, and with a man who clearly couldn't even tie his own shoes. It's not like once they got married, he would turn into a reliable man and a hard worker. I reminded her that she had spent weeks attacking me and now had no right to ask me for any help. I told her I would give her some advice. She needed to start looking for a job and sue Danny for child support. It was advice she didn't deserve. And you know what she said to all this? That I was being mean and accused me of being cold-hearted. She said I didn't understand how hard her life was and how much pressure she was under. I told her I knew perfectly well how hard life could be because I had lived it. When I was 16, I had nothing, and they kicked me out, so she could do the same as I did, starting from a much better foundation than mine. I told her she could choose to grow up, or she could choose to remain a spoiled brat, but now I choose to enforce the restraining order because it also includes phone contact, and this wasn't the first time she broke it. And that's what I did with her. I felt sorry that she was upset because her fiancé left her, but she had already had enough opportunities. Update 6. As I promised my sister, I was going to enforce the restraining order this time, and that's what I did. I know this will bring her more consequences because, besides trying to break into my house, she continues doing everything she shouldn't be doing. But I have been very tolerant with her. Too much. And it's time for her to face some consequences, even though she's pregnant. My mother didn't like this because it led to a new arrest, and she had to pay a fine to get out. Plus, new pages have been added to the court case. The case is currently pending due to the attempted break-in at my house, money that is also coming out of my mother's pocket. I don't know if I enjoy doing this to my sister, even though she deserves it, but that last part, making my mom suffer financially, now that I'm enjoying. At least things are calming down now that they must have noticed that I was not going to do anything for them. I wasn't going to give them my house, and if they keep bothering me, there's a good chance I'll continue giving them legal problems. It's better they realize this soon, because it's not helping anyone to keep insisting on things, and they are increasingly affected by it. Update 7. My sister is creating more problems for my mother, and I'm not just talking about the court case for breaking and entering. I have to say that in these months, my sister's lawyer has tried to negotiate with us to reach an agreement. She offered to pay $2,000 for some damages to the door if we agreed to drop the lawsuit. There will be people who will call me petty, bitter, or whatever for not accepting those $2,000, but the door is already fixed. The money would have to be paid anyway, and I hope she faces some other punishment, like a fine or jail for this. I know my sister doesn't have the money to pay for any of this, not even for a lawyer, but my mother does. But those aren't the only problems my sister has been having lately. Besides being about to give birth, she has also created new legal situations. Besides the child support lawsuit, she also hit Danny. My sister is asking for temporary child support until she gives birth, but Danny is fighting back because he wants a paternity test before giving her any money. To get a lawyer and fight this, he has found a job, so we were facing a motivation problem with Danny. The attack happened when my sister tried to reason with him for money now that he had a job, but he refused. I don't know what the place where Danny lives is like now, but there was a wooden board that my sister, 7 months pregnant at the time, took to hit him on the head. One more arrest, one more case, and even more money. I know this because my mother has called me pleading to drop some charges because she is running out of money. My sister hasn't even bothered to contact me. She knows what that implicates. I told my mother I would do it if we reached an agreement, which caught her attention. I told her I was thinking of getting a second vacation home, but by the beach. Obviously joking, though I haven't said it. When she asked me how she thought she could pay for something like that, I told her to take out a mortgage on her house. But she confessed she had already taken one out to cover my sister's expenses. I told her she should have kicked out the daughter who was hard to raise rather than the one who now has a vacation house, the one she could be using now. She told me she couldn't abandon her daughter in this difficult moment, to which I corrected her. No, that's not what you should do now. That's what you should have done a long time ago. Update 8. I think this will be the last of my updates, a recap of everything I've gone through in recent times. I'll start with the court case for my sister's attempted breaking and entering because I just feel like starting there. As I said, she has had to pay for the door and has earned a sort of probation, where she has to watch what she does or she could end up in jail and with a hefty fine. Now she lives with my mother in a rented house because my mother had to sell hers to support herself, pay the debts, and also support my sister and her newborn. My sister's baby is indeed Danny's daughter, but Danny made a deal where he would only pay half of the child support my sister expected if she dropped the charges for the attack with a wooden board. And as far as I know, Danny is not a very present father. Who would have thought? I can't believe the absurdity of my sister's situation and my mother's because if they hadn't felt entitled to my house, today my sister would be married and my mother would still have her house. Instead, they have made their lives miserable by creating unnecessary problems. It's been a pleasure to put them in their place.